Hello everyone, and welcome to Centering Justice. My name is Hamida Bagarathi, and I support our learning communities, and it's such a joy to be with you all today. Wanted to uplift that in our past session, we got some really good feedback, and we're hoping to implement some of that today, and that's going to show in a little bit of the opening and in other spots and places. And so just wanted to name at the top end, things might feel slightly different, and we'll offer a space for you to let us know how you feel about the differences and feedback at the end of our session. So as we move into this place, this space, I can say afternoon now, good afternoon. Let's all take a deep collective breath at our own pace. And then release it at our own pace. To bring us into this space together, to leave behind perhaps the meetings or playtime or books we were reading right before this. So I join you today from Ypsilanti on the unceded and occupied lands of the Anishinaabe, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, who are the three council fires of Michigan, the Sauk and the Fox and the Wyandot, and land in which contemporary Indigenous peoples continue to live and thrive and love and contribute to their own uplift and even our collective uplift. And throughout the decades and hundreds of years, our Indigenous and Native brothers and sisters have loved, forgiven, and redeemed and repaired with each other in their communities and with folks outside of their communities. So thinking about what brings us together today, we'll be talking about just that, how to explore repair. To give a little bit of insight into Centering Justice, those of you who have attended before, you can probably share this, but we invite visionaries, storytellers, doers, and healers who are interrupting the status quo to inspire us to believe in something greater and help us find our ways to actions that can help build that just and thriving society. And during our time together, our president and CEO, Yodit Mespin-Johnson, will be kind of doing some grounding in a few moments. Carly Frederick is incredible and is a really great part of the session in terms of our magical tech and spotlighting, and will also be on the chat. And myself will be all in conversation with our speakers, and then we will be closing with invitations for how we can engage, act, move from our speakers. So, who are our speakers? Today joining us, we have Angel McKissic from the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network, Germaine Smith from the Dispute Resolution Center, and Reverend Donnell Wyche from Vineyard Church here in Ann Arbor. So to offer us a little further grounding, I will pass on the metaphorical mic over to Yodit.
Thanks, Hamida. Welcome, everybody. It's hard to believe it's the end of March, y'all. It is the end of March. The land is preparing us for transition, for growth, for blooming and opening. On a personal note, this is a year that I set an intention to unbecome, y'all, to take off the masks I learned to put on to show up more fully for me and for others. And today feels tender. It feels beautifully messy, like an offering for healing and opening. And I received that. I received that gift from the universe. Y'all, 3 weeks ago, 2 people that I care about got up the courage to call me in on something that I did some years back that caused harm. I was wrong, and I acknowledged that with them, and we're working through it. I'm so deeply grateful that they didn't cancel me, that their courage meets my obligation to never do what I did again. Our relationship might not ever be the same, but something has shifted. I know that I'm changed because of this experience. I know that it was necessary. And every day since, I've been dying a little bit to my ego, one day at a time, holding the intensity of my own needs while never forgetting to center theirs. And damn it, if shame and guilt haven't tried to consume me and my thoughts as I process through. I know how insidious and unhelpful those two emotions can be. I'm talking to people about that every day. But here they are, every damn day. And honestly, I've been surprised at how narrow my thinking and perspective taking have been as I wallow through the depth of this experience. And because there are no mistakes, the same day I learned about my transgression, I learned that my son too had made a really poor and harmful decision at school. And you know what? I would have usually punished him for making such an egregious choice. But for the grace of those folks and what they extended to me before I picked him up, there are no mistakes. In the days since, I have needed to remember that we have the capacity for repair and for restoration embedded deep in our pre-colonial DNA. The kind of repair that happens in ourselves, in our families, and alongside community. This, I'm clear, is an opportunity, an opening for me to learn and to grow and to stretch myself and to metabolize what happened and what got unearthed, if for no other reason to remind myself that very few of us come to harm by first enacting it. I need help. We need help. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to have this dialogue today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carly.
Thanks, Yodi. As always, we want to give the speakers an opportunity to introduce themselves and share some of the identities or communities that they may be drawing upon as they enter today's conversation. And I want to acknowledge one of our speakers, Germaine Smith, had to unexpectedly hop off the Zoom call. And so we can loop back around for Germaine to introduce herself when she's able to rejoin. So I'm curious, Angel, would you feel comfortable starting?
Hi, good afternoon. My internet is like not today, so hopefully, I will come through. I've tried to move myself around, so apologies all if I start sounding like a robot or whatever. Right. First, I just want to acknowledge that Yodit's grounding introduction just it's beautiful, particularly because of her position and her capacity to be able to acknowledge harm in the capacity as a leader is really important for all of us to see and have modeled. That I found it really profound, so thank you. Right, so Angel McKissic, she, her. I am the senior program manager at the Detroit Justice Center. I'm also a co-founder of the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network with, alongside me, Belinda, who is here in the audience. She helps me run the joint, so I wanted to give her a shout out, along with Tashmika Turok, Carrie Landrum, and Barbara Jones. I always bring them into the space with me because, I don't do that work by myself. I don't want to misrepresent it either. The identities that I bring into the space are, I am woman, I am queer, I am also bicultural and biracial, I am Greek and West African, most prominently West African, and I immigrated here. So also immigration status and immigrant experience, as well as the experience of poverty during my formative years. Those are all really important identities to me that are sort of cannot be disarticulated from each other. And which have really shaped my lens and brought me to this work. So I bring all of that with me. The communities that I bring, I would say are, women and mothers, and also folks who are very much in whatever way that is accessible to them, trying to resist the forces of capitalism and misogyny and, all the harmful stuff. Those are the folks that I consider my people and who I bring in the space with me. So thank you for the prompt. I appreciate it.
Donnell, do you want to share?
Yes, I'm Donnell Wyche, pronouns he, him. Some of the identities that I bring into the space, a member of clergy, so a member of a faith community, and an organizer, which is something that I am learning to be. I'm a software developer by training, so that's the background that I come from, and I'm currently writing software right now. I am becoming an abolitionist, or I'm a baby abolitionist, though every abolition space that I go in, there is welcome and everyone's like, oh, we're all learning. So that's been really nice to be in that space with fellow abolitionists. I'm a Black man, a Black father of a Black son. And I think that informs a lot of my identity and some of the work that I do. Some of the communities that I work in, right now I'm on sabbatical. And so I have been focused on liberation and systems of liberation. So I've been studying how people get free. And so the focus of that is on human dignity, and that at our core, we all want to live in some experience of freedom. And so that has led me to some work with folks who face houselessness. It has led me to helping folks who are caught up in the carceral system. And I actually like to describe it as being caught up into that system, because it's actually designed to catch people and to trap them in that system. From a religious standpoint, I would say it's an anti-life system, and we would describe that as demonic. And so that's led me to do work around like warrant resolution. So I hosted a warrant resolution event last fall, and we're working on another one for this spring. And then most recently, I've been working on the issues of policing. And so I'm a member of the coalition Reimagining Our Safety. And so we're trying to get an unarmed police force, or excuse me, an unarmed public safety response team set up in the city of Ann Arbor. And then the other thing is I'm a learner. So as much as I have a lived experience, I realize that I haven't stopped learning. And so I am grateful for those who take time to teach. And so I'm trying to be a student as well.
Germaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Carly. So I'm Germaine Smith, and good afternoon, everyone. Lots of familiar faces here today. So my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently the assistant director with the Dispute Resolution Center. The identities that I bring in with me today, I'm a second generation Korean American, and very proud of it. Although when I was growing up in a small Midwestern Michigan town, it wasn't exactly, I didn't embrace that part of my identity when I was growing up. I wanted to blend in. I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb. I just wanted to be like everybody else. But obviously, as I grew up, and now being middle-aged, really appreciate the richness of the cultural heritage in which I grew up in, and many of the traditions that were brought over from my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather and aunts and uncles and cousins. I grew up in a multi-generational household. and was very, very close with my grandmother. I have very fond memories of her. And they brought a lot of agrarian knowledge with them. And so we had I think half of our backyard was a garden just full of, so many different, there must have been 50 different vegetables. And my grandmother would, I mean, she could do anything with very little, right? She made all these fermented dishes. I'm sure people are familiar with kimchi, and she would make tofu because it wasn't accessible where we were. So she grew the soybeans, and then, she processed it and she made the tofu. And we used to even have a cellar. My grandfather built a cellar to replicate what they had in Korea, probably about 3 or 4 feet deep. And we had huge, huge crock pots. They must have been 20 gallons, just full of fermenty foods. And I do this every single time. I always start talking about food and I make myself hungry and really longing for all those dishes my grandmother made. And those memories are just so precious to me. And, I do recall, I was thinking about this as I was reflecting on today. All the grandmothers and the aunties get together in the kitchen or sometimes outside when we're making huge batches of kimchi in the big tubs, sitting around, they're all, squatting and, making stuff and laughing and sharing and tasting. And, I realized that really was a restorative circle, right? That was a practice of connecting, of especially where we were, very isolated and not a lot of other Asian cultures and Asian families around. And so when everyone got together, it was just I just remember all of the laughter, being able to taste the food, of course, right? I think I tried to help. I don't think anybody wanted me to help when I was little, but but those are just just very, very fond memories of that. And I really hold on to that a lot. So other identities, I'm also a natural introvert. So being in these spaces and being vulnerable in spaces is a little uncomfortable for me, but I'm trying to step outside of my comfort zone, and open myself up a little bit more. So let's see what else. I'm also a beekeeper. I love, I could sit all day just observing the bees, just coming and going. And, it's also a matriarchal society. Honeybees are, so, the queen runs the show. And, and it's just beautiful to watch the interactions. They socialize, bees socialize. You'll see them with their little antenna like this, right? They're just hanging out, 2 or 3 of them. Or they have little cliques too. It's beautiful to watch. And I don't watch too close though, because I still don't like getting stung. That doesn't ever go away. Getting stung, you never forget that feeling, and you don't want it to happen, so you try to avoid it at all costs. So bees. I'm an avid gardener, of course. That learned that through my grandmother and my mother, and I do seed saving, and so I probably have maybe a couple generations of saved seeds. Which is also another part of my part of the community that I bring into is the food justice and food access, food sovereignty community. I was highly involved in that at the beginning of my career, and still, of course, is very, very dear to me. And I still volunteer in a lot of ways through that. And of course, let's see, I guess also doing some criminal justice reform work around policing. And involved with the Community Advisory Board to Law Enforcement in partnership with the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office. as well as a new initiative. And I'm really sorry if you hear my dogs growling in the background. They're playing, so my apologies. So maybe I'll just wrap it up really quickly here. And then also 21st Century Policing Commission Policy Committee, and of course a part of the restorative community, which really fills my spirit, fills my soul.
Thank you so much, Angel, Donnell, and Germaine, for openly, vulnerably sharing with us a few of the lenses and identities and affiliations and communities that you're entering this space with. So I'll do a slight regrounding or centering for us on what brought us together here today. Hurt people hurt people. This has become a common plea for compassion and movements for healing and justice. It begs us to see the humanity in our transgressors and offer the chance to repair harm. Putting this into practice, though, especially in the midst of our own pain, is easier said than done. And holding boundaries that keep us safe in the process is even harder. But our ancestors found ways, otherwise we, as a collective, wouldn't be here. How can we find tools for forgiveness, repair, and redemption in our collective pasts? So that is going to be our centering topic for today. And that held a lot. So I'll offer one small bite of a question just to start us off. What does repair mean to you? And Donnell, if you could start off our dialogue, that would be amazing.
So that's a big, it might be a small bite, but it's a really big question, I think. And I think as I sort of respond to the prompt, I want to also sort of acknowledge some assumptions that I have as I respond, which is inferred in repair is the desire to mend. And so when we start with a desire to mend or to restore or to bring back to life what's been either stolen or broken or mistreated, I think the place I want to start with is that we have to start repair with acknowledging that harm has occurred. And if we are unwilling to actually name the harm, we can't actually repair what has transpired. And that is so simple to every one of you on the call. And as someone who works with people as my primary occupation as a pastor, I recognize just how hard that is, how hard it is for us to acknowledge we have been harmed, because there is a vulnerability that is at the center of naming that. I don't want to give you power over me that you have done something to me that I now have to respond to. And then we carry that with us like baggage, and we pack it up and we move it with us, and it goes into every relationship that we interact with, and it begins to shape our world and our worldview. And so with that harm, I want to also acknowledge that there may be trauma and pain, because we are not an island unto ourselves. These things sort of trigger relationships and things that have happened to us in our past. And it either opens us and makes us want to fix what's wrong, or it shuts us down, to be overly simplistic in that. And so what we need in order to even get to repair is time and space. We need time to just sit with what's been done. And then we need space to decide what we want to do with what's been done. And I know like all these things are work. So maybe what does repair mean? It means work. And sometimes we are ready for that work. Sometimes we are not ready for that work. And I think as one of the things I've reflected on, I'm You can't tell, but I'm actually a little older. And as I've gotten older, I've realized you go in one of two directions. And you either hold on to the things that have brought you to the place that you're in, whether they have been profitable to you or not, or you become open to new ways of resolving the things you encounter. And as I age, I realize I am letting go of more and more things. And I don't know if it's because, as someone said so eloquently, I'm at the halftime of this journey. And so as I look at the halftime, I'm like, I want to maximize the time that I have left. I don't want to spend time holding on to things that I can't resolve. So I think what repair means is it means work. So when we've given ourselves time and space, and as Yodid and Angel have said, we've given ourselves space to metabolize some of the trauma and pain that we've experienced, then I think we can actually be open to working on repair. And in that context, I think repair means listening. It starts with listening to yourself. It involves listening to the environment that you're in. I think we just ignore the spaces that we operate in, and those spaces either ground us or they agitate us. I think it means listening to those who have caused harm and trying to understand like where that harm is coming from. Is it control? Is it fear? Is it vulnerability? Right? And then it means sitting with what you hear, which is the hard part, because I am, let's see, what am I? I'm an activator on that Strengths Finder. And so when I find a problem, I want to create a solution and I want to move past what's there, but that doesn't always repair what's been broken. It means moving slowly with yourself and with others. And I think ultimately it means being vulnerable to being hurt again. And that's the thing, I think, honestly, with you all, though I haven't met all of you, I just want to shield myself from. I just want to shield myself from future pain. But in order for us to repair what's been done to us, we have to enter into a space of vulnerability. So I think for me, that's what repair means.
Thank you, Donnell. Angel, if you could offer thoughts.
Yeah, I think Donnell laid out a lot of sort of places where I think I'd like to pick up on. As is my tendency, I am always like answering questions with more questions. I think this question in particular about, what does repair mean to you? It just opens up just many avenues for myself. I think about, one, I avoid any type of prescription. The process of, repair is so highly contingent on the folks involved, the, nature of the harm or the pain, all of those contextual factors. I think some of the things that Donnell mentioned are true. I mean, vulnerability and acknowledging and naming harm, these are all sort of the prerequisites, right, of like opening up a process. But I'm also thinking too about what the barriers are to repair. I think it was mentioned earlier, maybe some of the opening, reflecting on my own experience of causing harm. The most difficult part, even those of us who are well-meaning and say we want to get the feedback and we want to hear it, we don't really. I mean, we say that, and then when somebody tells us something that we don't like, we like, I like feedback on my terms when it like feeds, my self-concept of being a great person. And then, then when you get it, it's like, no, actually you said some wild, crazy stuff. And it's like, oh, so, I had a process myself with a good girlfriend this summer where, uh, I've been really drawing on that in preparation for this because we did repair that particular rupture. And I was thinking of what it took and the elements that I can identify that were critical to that process was one, I was feeling the energy in this space. There's something that shifts when harm happens between people. And you have to be attendant to that. um I sort of neglected it and then it started sort of itching, like the energy, something was off between us, the communication was falling off. um and I had to let the idea creep in my mind that maybe I did something. And on some level, we know, I mean, on a psychological level, we have things that tell us, like guilt and shame. That's their job, to tell us we have transgressed against our values somehow. um they're information for us. It's not necessarily something to push away. If we have a different relationship to guilt, in particular, which says I did something wrong, not I am something wrong, that's shame. But guilt has a function, and instead of sort of letting us be overwhelmed by it, it's like, what is it signaling to me? Something has gone wrong here. And so I was sensing that, but couldn't name that. And once I named that, that opened up the space for her, as the person who was harmed. So I think too, thinking about whose responsibility, who's responsible for the repair. That's also a big question. What role do we play as, the person who did the harm, the person who was harmed, but also people who enabled the harm, people who were neglectful, broader communities, thinking about what their role is in the reparative process. Is another question that has come up in response to this question. But I would say the most difficult piece from my personal anecdote is hearing that I've done harm, and how that is sort of discontinuous with who I understand myself to be. Not me, not the restorative justice, like that's literally my whole job. I didn't, what? You know, that is difficult to hear, that you are a person who's done harm, even though your self-concept is that's not me, especially if you have been harmed and you have been in the position of being a victim. Now to be in the position of someone who has perpetrated harm is difficult. So I think I'm thinking about barriers. What are the barriers? Ego, straight up pain, and the identity crisis that it might launch us into. That's from the perspective, of being the person who's done the harm. And of course, being harmed also can throw us into a whole series of identity crises. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that repair is not linear. And I think one thing that maybe doesn't get mentioned enough about repair is that it's a creative act. It's just like memory. Our relationship to memory is like you have memories in this filing cabinet in your mind and you just pull them out, and recall them perfectly. No, memory is a creative construction. You are constructing that memory every time you take it out to remember it. It's the same way with repair. It's not this perfect mending, just like any scrape, especially the older you get, it like you get scars. It doesn't just heal back like a 5-year-old with perfect skin. Repair has to be creative, because think about if you're the person who's harmed, it throws you into it could be PTSD, it could just be depression, it could be sort of maybe things that were present for you before. Trying to think of like who is this new person in the aftermath of harm, right? What are my values now? How do I orient myself to people? Do I trust people? It's really a creative act of trying to, become someone in the aftermath of a harm who, because we're never the same. We're always changed by the harm that happens to us and the harm that we do. So I always like to highlight, especially like when I was a therapist and I was working with women who were using drugs and other things in response to harm, was that we have to reframe the way that we respond to harm, even the ways that look destructive, right? I think about the women I worked with who were using drugs. I always tell them, these drugs kept you alive. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but for some folks, this, like, it might feel very sort of antithetical to tell people like, listen, you did this as a way to keep yourself going. Because for some people, they would be eaten up by their pain and their trauma. So I think we proliferate many creative ways to cope. And I just like to honor the fact that this, what we call post-traumatic growth, which can also be, is a clinical term, but what we also call repair, is inherently creative. And I think if we embrace that, for some people, that can open up, if we understand it as a creative endeavor, that can open up avenues to repair that maybe weren't possible. Because I think we're told that repair follows this linear trajectory, right? That you know, like you said, you name the harm, and then you know, be vulnerable, and maybe you have a circle with the harm doer, you know, it follows these things. But sometimes repair comes in, and healing comes in places that are completely unexpected. And I think we should be open to that. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, wow, how to follow that, Angel. I mean, I think like both you and Donnell just brought up so many things, and you know, and I think especially in restorative work that we do at the DRC, you know, we really look at it, we never look at it as a linear process. And it's always a circular process, right? And I'm going to channel Belinda Doolin here, who's the executive director, and she uses this phrase quite often: the circle will take care of itself, right? However that's going to look. And I think for some people it can be a little scary because there isn't, you know, it's a messy process. It's not a, okay, yep, so we've acknowledged the harm. Now what's the plan moving forward? Do you feel remorse? And how do we continue on this healing trajectory or this healing path? It's not like that at all. Like Angel was saying, you know, a lot of times when we're working with folks, you know, there could be 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. Right. And, you know, and to me as a facilitator, that's an indication that, whoa, you know, like maybe we went too fast, like Donnell was saying, right? This is a slow internalized process. And also, you know, I mean, there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of trauma to deal with. And it's, nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody wants to, I mean, even having this conversation today, like as I was reflecting on, you know, the last session I was in was leading with love, abundance, and joy, right? And that was a fun conversation. I don't know if you remember, Yodi, but that was a fun conversation. And, you know, it was very, you know, and so from this juxtaposition, you know, to repair and harm and forgiveness, right, feels a little bit on the other end of the spectrum. And it's been hard for me to really, you know, it's been stirring things up in me, actually, thinking about this. It's, you know, because a lot of times I'm not doing the work for myself, you know, as facilitators, right? And maybe, you know, even as in your pastorship too, Donnell, you are holding space for other people, and you're holding their emotions, right? And essentially you're kind of this passive, almost invisible figure, you know, and so you don't even realize how much that you absorb, right? All of that. And I think a lot of practitioners and facilitators, and probably many folks here, are very empathic, right? And so how can you not absorb those emotions? How can you not go on that same journey of pain and suffering with the people that you're trying to help? You know, start on some kind of a healing path. I know I'm not answering the question of repair very well. I mean, as both Donnell and Angel have said, right? Like, it's such a big and loaded question. And I think, when we talk about restoration, we talk about repair, we're also talking about, right, wholeness. How do we bring ourselves back into that wholeness, right? Because all the harms, right, that we carry with us, or the harm we have created, and I'm gonna harken back to a phrase from the Dakota, and if I'm mispronouncing, it's my apologies. It's Nari Kichobi, which means calling back the spirit. And essentially, I think when we're in this repair and restoration mode, right, we're trying to get those pieces back, right? Trying to get those pieces back to Germaine, the strong woman, however I view myself as, right? And trying to, fill those spaces that have been missing, right? And I think I'll end there.
Yes, please, and just a pause. Whew. This whole idea of like finding our way back, Germaine. Okay, so y'all just gonna have church up in here today, huh? Angel, Donnell, Germaine. Let's move on. Woo!
One of is there another prompt? Because if are we gonna keep on with it? Okay, all right. Great, because I'm taking notes as I hear everyone, because as everyone contributes, stuff is popping into my head. One of the things that I used to tell myself and my clients as a therapist, repair for some folks does also implicate forgiveness. And, we do a whole other session on forgiveness. But I think, again, I'm going back to like barriers, thinking about like what prevents us, what keeps us stuck. Because a lot of us, we out here, myself included. I got through with my girlfriend, but I'm stuck on other things as well. And I think about how, because we have let the carceral systems drive discourse on harm and forgiveness and accountability and punishment, we sort of model our own philosophies about it after that. And it's not our fault. It's not anything, to feel bad about. It's just like, this is what we've inherited, particularly as Americans, in the particular American brand of the carceral system, which is especially terrible. But I think about the way the court systems, right? In the RJ network, we had a RJ meeting, intensive, whatever, gathering. And we had a woman in there who was formerly incarcerated and said, when you're in the system, you are encouraged to deny responsibility. The whole system is set up so that you are not accountable. Don't say you did it. Keep your mouth shut. Like even post-conviction, because people are, pending appeal. So the whole system works against repair. And so we have to sort of, like what was said before, sort of try to call back to that pre-colonial DNA, because it is in us. We do know how to do this, but we need communities of care and support and mutual learning to help each other do it. One of the things that I found that was a common theme when we talked about forgiveness and healing was that people felt that if they forgave themselves sometimes, but especially others who harm them, they're somehow betraying their pain. That it was some sort of betrayal on themselves and what they experienced to forgive someone else. And that's the sort of capitalistic, black and white thinking, that we can't hold a bunch of stuff in the same space. You can hold someone's humanity in the space and say, if you've heard someone's story or not, and you have some understanding of how they came to enact this harm on you, that can also sit alongside that. I understand it and I get it, and you also still harmed me, and this is you know, the consequence of that harm in my life. So I think for me too, it's not a, you know, all or nothing game here. You know, it's like we need to have huge space available for everyone's humanity. And it's much easier. I mean, I'm on here trying to, you know, be cute and talk. I know in practice, this is hard. It's really hard. And it's not always our fault. You know, we don't have systems and communities of support anymore. And I brought this example in like our planning meeting about my 5-year-old who's in kindergarten, and like this little boy like tried to like choke her at school. I'm not sure what was happening in the art class. And no teachers, like they just swooped him out of the class, like the carceral system does, just disappears people. And my daughter was like, well, isn't somebody going to do something? Isn't somebody going to say something? Is there going to be accountability? And like 2 days went past and nothing happened. So then I got a call from the teacher on the 3rd day that was like, right, so Karis told some little boy at school, I knew who it was, that she's gonna kill his family. And I was like, okay, well, all right. So like not the proudest parenting moment, but what I recognized is that what I was seeing play out was what we see play out all the time when folks don't have the space to have their pain acknowledged. That's what happens. That anger, that feeling that, you know, you didn't get justice, that no one was acknowledged your pain, that's what it transforms into, is aggression and violence. And, you know, I saw that and I had no judgment on her. And I said, I'm not going to punish her. You all failed. As a school system, in your capacity as teachers, somebody should have attended to this. And so, you know, I think about that too when we talk about repair. We always put it on each individual person. Like, you figure out how to heal yourself and get yourself together. And if you don't, you failed somehow. And of course, we internalize that. Why can't I get over this pain? Why does it still bother me? Why do I still hate this person? You know, and that's a piece that we brought into at the planning meeting, is that compassion for ourselves is really important. You're still going to be hurt, and even if you say that you've forgiven someone and you still have like nuggets of resentment, that's fine. That's part of the process. You know, like, it does take time. I know it's cliche, but for some people it doesn't. I mean, again, I'm not going to make broad statements about what healing and repair and forgiveness look like for everybody. For some people, it is that moment where things just switch for them and they can release it. And for other people, it's a lot slower. And I just think that we as a community, we have a role to play in other folks' journeys of repair, meaning we don't judge somebody if they're still in the stage where they're like, let's go blow that person's tires out. Like, right now, I'm ready to do it. You know, we need to be able to say, we get it. Like, we know you're hurt. We're not going to judge you. It's the same for grief, because these things come together, right? Our culture is bad about all of that stuff, pain and grief. It's like, oh, that person died a year ago. You should be able to get back to work and be okay. So we are implicated in everyone who's around us in their journeys of healing and repair. You have a role to play. There's accountability on us too, to say, you know, are we creating communities where people can bring in the full emotionality of the experience, the ugly parts, the messy parts, some of the monstrous parts? You know, can we be there for that, to let that play out and support it so that the other work can happen too?
If I can pick up a theme for a moment, which is on something Angel said around compassion for yourself. I've been studying systems of liberation. And one of those journeys has taken me into my own family study. And my family, my people, come from Southampton, Virginia. And as I have learned about Southampton, Virginia, it's the place that Nat Turner led his slave rebellion. And one of the things that I have discovered as I've been reading about his story for liberation is where he centered the compassion. And Angel sort of alluded to what we might describe as the monstrous side of what happens when injustice is, we're entreated with injustice and there's no sort of avenue for wholeness and restoration. And as I'm learning about his story, one of the things in his rebellion was he didn't want to leave any enslavers alive to enslave future generations of his kids or the kids that he was protecting. And that has been reorienting for me in terms of where we place the compassion. Do we place the compassion with ourselves? Do we place it in some neutral place, or do we place it on the other? And his rebellion, if you've studied it, it was actually a very key rebellion in the story of enslavement in the United States, because Virginia debated actually ending slavery, the system of slavery, after his rebellion. It was that significant of an uprising. Now we know they took a different choice. They made Virginia a slave state, so that if you were free, you had to leave the state, because they didn't want anyone who was Black, who wasn't enslaved, to be in the state. And I've been just sitting with what that compassion to repair looks like, right? There's an enactment that causes us to just pause, I think. I think that's the thing I've been really sitting with in these months of sabbatical, as I've been reading and studying these systems. And so I'll bring it closer, because we've had harm committed against us in our family, and then we have to figure out, like, how do we repair that harm? And we had an incident also at the school, also with a daughter and a boy, and it was a racialized, gendered violence, and it was this boy threatening to pull out the weave of a child, and that was the threat. And it was like, okay, what do we do with this? Like, I was traumatized when I got that call that this gendered racial violence was threatened against my child. And it just, like, I just was in tears around it, because of the loss of innocence, the loss of agency, the situation that my child was placed in, and the inability of the school to honor and say that this was significant, much in the same way that Angel relayed. I got a call saying, hey, this thing happened. We brought them all in. The kid apologized. They know what they did was bad. Everything's good. And I was like, no, everything is not good. I was like, there were these things that I needed in this process, which I enumerated with the administrator. And then I was like, you know what? You all need to realize that this is significant. This is where it happens, that my daughter now gets this message that a man can threaten violence against her, and the way we restore what has been broken is he just apologizes. And I was like, I don't want this as the message. So I do what I do. I'm an escalator. And I've learned a lot from white culture. So you write letters, and that documents things, and white people respond to written notices in ways that I just didn't know. I mean, I wish you white people would have sent a memo and told us earlier. I would have been able to have a better life. But when you write a well-written letter, people respond. So, the superintendent called, the VP for, the middle school, the principal. And I was like, see, you all knew what to do, and you chose not to do it. And when everybody called, I said, why did it take me escalating to you before you decided that the human dignity of my child was violated? Why didn't you decide at that moment that you needed to acknowledge this as if it were your own human dignity being violated? And I can tell you, as someone who does this work a lot, this is exhausting. It's exhausting. I just don't want to have to deal with it. I don't want to have to be the canary in the mine. So yeah, I just want to just encourage you to just think about where you center the compassion. And I actually want to give you permission to center yourself in the compassion, and that it's okay to figure out what you need before you try to figure out what's needed in the situation. And it's selfish. But I think in order for us to not only survive, but to thrive, we have to learn how to center ourselves. And I have spent a lifetime deferring, and I'm trying to bring that to a stop. You know, like my daughter apologizes a lot, and I'm just like, you don't have to apologize for taking up space. You get to be. So I just wanted to pick up that theme of compassion.
Oh, wow, Donnell. Yeah, so many thoughts kind of racing through my mind. We get to be. I forget that a lot. Something that I've been reading lately is a book called Love and Rage by Lama Rod Owens. And I literally just started reading it last week. So I haven't gotten very far. And I wanted to share a passage, just a small passage here, from a chapter called Woundedness and Rage. And the thing about white colonialist fear and rage is that I have nothing to do with it, but my body still becomes a receptacle for this unmetabolized woundedness. At the end of the day, I find myself hauling not just my trauma, but also the trauma of whiteness. When I read that, that really, I think, encapsulated a lot of what I've been feeling, I think, most of my life as a woman of color, and kind of explained actually an expression that's hard to define in Korean culture. It's called Han, spelled H-A-N. And Han is a collective grief, sorrow, pain, anger, fear, rage, anxiety that is so all encompassing and so powerful that Koreans believe you can die from it. If you hold on to this Han, right, that you can die from it. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and it's been it's hard to get out of that sometimes. It really is. And it feels like that's, and it can overtake some of the joy, some of the repair work that I'm doing, some of the healing work. And I try to be really mindful about that when I go to those spaces, especially when I'm holding space for somebody else, right? To make sure that I'm not bringing my Han, right, into somebody else's space. And that brings me to I'll share a situation or experience that I was in. I don't have any kids, so no, not a kid story. But as a facilitator, and I think about this like it was yesterday. It really affected me in such a deep way. So I was doing a facilitation for a community of which I was not from or part of or belonged to. So I was asked to come in and do some bystander intervention training. And it was a large group with a varied age range. So we had kids and adults and parents, and predominantly a white community. And there were maybe 2 or 3 families of color that were in that space. And I had made an assumption that some of the some of the situations that we were simulating and we were discussing and we were talking about, most folks understood, right? One of the situations was about graffiti of the Nazi symbol, right? And there were some, especially the kids, some kids didn't know what that was. And I did not know what to do. And I had made an assumption that the community, and the parents would step in. And nobody else, everybody was looking at me like what to do. So I said, let's take a break. I didn't know what to do. I thought I had in my heart hoped that community would rally around and come together, and they would hold that space for that child and figure out what to do, and they didn't. And and so that wasn't the only situation in that same facilitation. We were talking about race and racism, and the one Black family that was there, the woman stood up and she said, "I'm not feeling safe," and she pointed out, "I'm edging my way towards the door so I have an escape route, so I can get out of this space as quick as I can." And again, I made another assumption thinking, because I'm not from the community, I don't know who this woman is. I wanted to get to her, and I couldn't, because she left. She made this declaration and then she left. And again, I made another assumption thinking that the community would come together and that they would help her, they would do something, right? And they didn't. And so I'm not trying to say that this is I'm not trying to put any sort of blame or shame on the community, but this is an instance in which I felt I caused some deep harm to the Jewish community and the Jewish families that were in that space, to the Black family that was in that space. This is a situation where I don't have closure, right? I don't have closure. I think about this actually quite frequently, that, I wish I knew who that woman was before. I wish I knew who that woman was, because I want to go and give her a hug, and I want to apologize, and I want to say I'm sorry, and I want to do all the things, right? To, because it's hard to hold on to that, right? It's really hard to hold on to that, and not having that closure is even harder. But I've never actually talked about this in public. I guess this is kind of public, but maybe in private with friends and family. But it really affected me, and I and so that's just one of that's an instance that I just wanted to share of me causing harm. I didn't maybe do it intentionally. I didn't obviously do it intentionally, but it hurts me that I hurt somebody else, right?
Sure. Germaine, can we stay there for a second? Maybe take it off of you, but I'm interested in this situation, but I feel like I've seen, well, first of all, I too, you want to alleviate the sting of complicity in harm, whether you intended it or not. There is that, right? There's that dynamic happening. And I see that as a facilitator, especially over the last couple of years, where the sort of, when we're talking about racialized, gendered and other acts of oppression, police brutality, what I saw, and frankly had cognitive dissonance because I too reacted in this way. Donnell, I kind of laughed like, I'm the white lady I told, stop saying you got a Black friend. Like, I'm not, not that exact situation, but like my, so how you all, when you say, Donnell, that we could be mindful of where to center the compassion. One of the things that I'm looking for myself is I'm creating for myself is a boundary that does not presume that those that I enacted harm on owe me anything, right? Of course I long for it. Of course I want it. Of course I'll hope that they will forgive me, and they might not. And I think I'd love to hear, if I've been clear, then I want to pause so you have space to respond to this, because I think it's really helpful. Like, Angel, I see you nodding your head. Get in there with me. And if I'm not clear, give me an opportunity to make what I'm leading towards more clear.
Yeah, can you do that?
Yep. So what I'm thinking about is when the center is on those that have been harmed. And so then those of us, in my case, or Germaine's case, that enacted harm, I'm thinking about that Black family may not want to hear from Germaine, or want her hug, or her sorry, or even though Germaine wants that for all the right reasons. And similarly, over the last couple of years, when I've been facilitating space, especially as people throw around reparations and this and that and the other, it's still very centered in the case of race on white people and alleviating the complicity in the system of whiteness. And yet I have heard many communities of color say, I'm not trying to like be buddy buddy. Like, yes, do your work. Yes, acknowledge your harm. Yes, we understand that we are all, victims in this system of white supremacy, capitalism, et cetera. And I got a boundary, right? And how, can we talk about that more, and how repair may not look like what I want it to be, Angel?
That's an excellent observation that I think probably is less talked about, is our sense of entitlement. I think in both positions, in terms of the folks who have caused harm, I think especially those who are ready to, do the work of accountability, it's kind of, we've seen it, anyone else who's doing the work probably have seen it too. It's like, you should be grateful that I'm a person who's willing to like speak with you and talk with you, and like, how dare you not like take audience with me? Like, I am, I'm so evolved and I'm ready to, enter into a process of accountability. And it's like, that doesn't have to involve the person that you harmed. It doesn't. But that's why I'm saying that this is this other piece of community that we need. You can't just be out here, in the wind. Like, we need communities of support for, when, yes, and they have the right to be like, I get it, good for you. Like, if, it's great to know that you acknowledge you did something to me, but I have absolutely no obligation to ever speak to you or look at you, acknowledge you again. Like, if that's a part of what the person needs, that's a part of what the person needs. And then you need to figure out what's your alternative route, for your own process. Because we're not entitled to anybody's time or energy or space, or forgiveness for that. I think then that means, though, we do have to build communities of care and support. And one inroad to that I see is that folks have to tell their truth. A lot of times when we are harmed, we feel very isolated in the harm. You can feel very lonely, like you're the only one who's going through. And of course, there's no new harm out here. Okay. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, there's nothing new. It's 5 different kinds of harm. Everyone has experienced it. It's like, you, of course you're not alone. There are millions of people that you are a part of community of, whether or not it's the club nobody wants to be in, right? When you experience some type of harm. But what like, when we say build community, what does that mean? Like, what do we actually do? How do you even start that? And I think for some of us, that means telling the truth about our lives and about what have happened to us, and not in a way that's like over sensational or exploitive, but to say, in a constructive way, like, this has happened to me, because there's learning that can happen between us. If I am in acute harm and I am able to be in community with someone who's 20 years out from their harm, you can say, I can get there maybe, you know, there, and that implicates like intergenerational learning and cross-cultural learning too, about how other cultures see harm and see community. But for me, one of the opportunities that I see to start to build that is for people to start telling their truth. And I'll say, I know for some folks the stakes are high, but I always invoke Audre Lorde, where she says, I can't remember the essay, but she says, the machine will grind you down to dust anyway, so you might as well just speak the truth. Like, your silence will not save you, you know, her famous, is true. Whatever you think you're gaining by staying silent, the cost is really high, not only to yourself, but to those who could benefit from your truth around you. Now, as a therapist and someone who's a trauma survivor, I will say not everybody's ready for that. So this is no judgment. Don't feel like, you know, when some work has been done, when it's safe, then there's the opportunity to say, that's that positive construction you can make around the harm. You know, how can this serve others? But also that process of serving others serves you too. You know, there's a mutuality in truth telling and storytelling that can be the foundational fabric of our communities. But it does start with saying, me too, I've also been harmed in this way, or also I harmed someone the way you were harmed, you know? So if we can learn from each other, we don't necessarily have to be in the space with the person who harmed us or who we harmed, but we can hear from people who have very similar experiences, who are in a safe place to explore those together. We just don't have those right now. We're trying to like ad hoc put them together, you know, you with the friend, and you maybe like let a little bit out and see if they can handle it. And, you know, like we need actual like systems of support for this, rather than people taking, you know, real risks with their truth telling and then someone shaming them, blaming them. And I know people are out here creating, you know, communities of peer support, but I think that's one of the answers to what you're saying of like, what happens when someone's like, I don't want nothing to do with you. Well, then I think that's when community can really step up.
So I want to jump on your question around like, what does it mean to have compassion for yourself? And I'll just tell a story. So I'm a pastor of a multi-ethnic church. Our church, when I arrived, was like 95% white. And then in my tenure, we've now moved it to about 46% people of color. And so people have two reactions. They're like, why'd you get rid of all the white people? And I was like, I didn't get rid of the white people. I just invited more people of color. And so then the numbers moved. And I had a little group, a pastor's advisory committee that I would meet with on Tuesday morning. And we would have breakfast. And I purposely put some people that would disagree with me in that space so that I could have conversation with them before I had those conversations with the congregation. So I'm going to say this thing. How does that land so that I can figure out how to make it land well within the congregation? Now, all those intentions were good. Here are the things that I learned. Number one, I wouldn't actually do it that way again. And I wouldn't do it that way again because it wasn't compassionate towards me, because I was in a space of vulnerability. And the people who were joining me in that space did not agree to share that space of vulnerability. So to pick up what Angel said, they didn't agree to be truthful with me. And so that created harm. It created harm to the extent that I had to kick people off of that committee because I could not carry their sort of unarticulated and undigested, to pull the comment out of the chat, their undigested trauma and carry it, because that's what they wanted me to do, but they wouldn't ask for that. They just expected me to do it. And in the role of a pastor, there is this unarticulated expectation that I'm going to carry your trauma for you. Now, I'm happy to go with you on your journey. I'm happy to help share your load if you ask, but I can't assume to do the work that you need to do. And when I bring up the work you need to do, I don't want to be vilified for being a mirror. And that took 2 years before I said, this is not good for me, because I was not actually starting to like these people. And these are my congregants. These are my key leaders. These are the people that I invited into confidence to help me lead the church. And it just, we don't talk a lot about emotional intelligence. We sort of fumble our way through it, but there's just something about learning. Like Angel said earlier, it's like guilt and shame are early indicators that you have violated your values. And we tend, in our desire to get along, we tend to just try to be along.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If I can offer anything of value, I just want to say, I don't think you're going to get as much mileage out of that as you hope. And what I would rather recenter is, how about you have more compassion for yourself? And when you start, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but,
we're running out of time anyway, but go ahead.
well, I mean, I see it all the time. And you can check me if this was not the case, but I think part of your strategy was to mitigate mitigate risk, right? To understand, like, let me do this focus group, right?
Yes.
This gonna beat up the thing before I go. I see that at an individual level. I see it interpersonally. I see it organizationally. Hell, that's what strategic planning is, right? Let me assume all the risks so I can try to mitigate them so that we can be successful. And what you and Ree in the chat in terms of this practice piece is like, first of all, how do we create the conditions where risk can happen, but risk doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to mean that you are harmed in the process, right? Yeah. So how do we create, and I think this is an opportunity that we all need, like, how do we move, rather than from risk mitigation strategies, to creating, as best we can, conditions that make folks safe to speak the truth.
So,
right?
so I had to learn how to live in my reality.
Yeah.
And I know, again, it's such a
The
simple
yeah.
thing, right? It's such a simple thing. But in almost all of the spaces we operate in, we're not living fully. I should say, I'm not living fully in my reality, because I'm tempering the words that I use.
Yes.
I'm shepherding how I situate myself. I'm paying attention to power dynamics. I'm trying to, as you say, invite people in and not exclude them. I'm an extrovert who talks a lot, so I have to be quiet more, right? And then what I was realizing was, oh, I'm not creating any space where I can be authentically who I am. Now, Brené Brown talks about this in all of her books about, inviting people into the arena. And that, to use shared language, that's a framework, right? It's like, what does it mean for me to be vulnerably me? It means that you have to be vulnerably you. And that's hard work to get people to come and meet you in that space.
Yeah, I used to say, if I could start every diversity, equity, inclusion training with my name, with the group saying, my name is such and such, and I'm a racist, we could get way more work done. But instead, I spend the majority of the time with folks trying to convince themselves and me that they're not. Right?
Exactly.
And you can apply that to any other ism, right? If we could get past that shit, we'd get some actual work done. But instead,
exactly. But we've got to tend to everything else. And so here's what I had to do. And this was really, really hard. I had to create a boundary. And I erected the boundary, and then I maintained the boundary, which meant I had to lose that person. They left, and they took their money with them. They took their influence with them. They
Come
took
on.
their friends with them. And I said, you know what? I don't want to spend 1 minute chasing people who don't want to be where I'm going. I don't want to spend
That's it.
1
That's right.
minute. But this is in the second half of life. In the first half of life,
Honey,
I
tell
was
them marching towards
contorting
that 50, it'll
myself.
get you true.
I was
It'll get you true.
bending. I was, I was carrying everything. But now I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to be free. You're going to be free. You're going to be happier in a place where they don't talk about race.
Come on.
You're going to be happy in that space.
Yes.
And I'm going to be happy not to have to deal with you not talking about race.
Come on now.
It's like-
Come on. You
So
know,
that's
the great Paul
compassion.
Saginaw says that our values ought to cost us something, right? And I tell our
Well,
team and
but
do
that's
that all the
hard
time.
when you raising money. Look, you know this, like
Come
I
on.
know this. When you
Uh-uh.
when you are living hand to mouth, when you're living, from somebody's pocketbook
do.
to your next
do.
bill
I
payment,
do.
it's hard
Come
to
on
live
now.
in that reality. And that's the privilege that sometimes, at least Black folks, don't get to live in. That we
sure.
can just say, hey, I'm not interested in what you're given, because if I say that, I lose your money and I need your money. And so the way I think about it is a scriptural thing, that the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the righteous. And then I just divide, these folks. And I'm like, it's all my money. So, but that's a whole nother conversation. I've gotten off track. Sorry.
Well, we got 7 minutes, and typically oh my goodness, we devote this time to your invitations, but I'm feeling the Spirit is moving me to say, what do you need to say in this time that we haven't asked? Please, Germaine, and then Angel, I'm gonna have you round us out. What's on your heart? Yeah, Adrienne Marie Brown would say, what's the conversation that only we can have in this space?
Yeah. What am I feeling right now? I was so nervous coming into this. And like I said earlier, so much stirring up in me, right? The things that you don't want to feel and think about. And honestly, and at the end of this, I feel very filled. I was feeling a little depleted, actually, just because I was just ruminating in it, right? Ruminating in repair and harm and forgiveness and reconciliation and anger. Yeah. And maybe this was cathartic for me where I'm at right now. And Donnell, I haven't heard you speak or preach in a long time. And maybe I'll have to come out to Vineyard one of these Sundays, but I'm feeling.
No, that time through the wrong time.
Well, anyway, so my heart is feeling full, and so thank you.
Yeah, this from top to bottom, I was here for it. I really appreciate a space where, especially the folks who are facilitating the space and who are in leadership, sometimes they tend to be really committed to a version of leadership which is somehow infallible, or like not some post-human posture. So I really do appreciate the humanity that was able to show up in the space, which of course allows it's like a domino effect, right? Then everyone is able to show up. So I really appreciate that. And I think what I'm leaving on, what's really with me is like, and I'll go back to the compassion piece and just like talking about harm and healing and like the post-traumatic growth or whatever folks like to call, is that what's been helpful for me is like, the world, especially if you are, oh man, so many things. If you are Black, if you are a woman, like if you wear your hair natural, I mean, all the things, like, you are going to get the brutality every day from external sources. So I'm like, what I'm not going to do is do it to myself. I'm not doing that. Like, I already have to deal with it, from everybody else. even with the privileges that I have. And knowing that my other brothers and sisters deal with it more severely, I'm just not here for judging myself, shaming myself, or the other folks who are in my community. I think that's the stuff that keeps us stuck in the healing. And one reflection that I will offer, which I think is really important, which I do a lot sometimes when I'm working with folks around this, is a reflection that has been helpful for me is to take some time with who I am when I've been harmed. It's usually like a breakout room that I do when I do like restorative justice stuff. And I think even as practitioners, everybody, that question is important because, you know, harm is transformative, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the worse. And sometimes it transforms us in ways that are not cute. And we need to be able to know who is that person and why are they the way they are when they're harmed. I think for me, and then to follow that up with compassion, like to not say, you know, okay, here she is and she's a hot mess, you know, but to say like, you know, I've learned to put the rage and the anger where it belongs. You know, I do that return to sender when somebody tries to give me some shit, like this is not, that's not for me. I feel that way even when I'm harmed, because that's the sort of capitalist thing, right? Is you're gonna trash talk your way into a better habit. You know, people will say, I get down on myself, like that's how I'm gonna start a new exercise or a diet, whatever people do. And that ain't it. I'm gonna just tell you that doesn't work. Like, you know, it doesn't. It's counterintuitive, but even when you've done something wrong or even when you're in a bad place, meeting yourself with that compassion and really like universal sense of love is what is needed. I mean, I worked with folks who were deep in years long substance use. And what is the prominent addiction model is to shame you out of your addiction. Look where you are. Is this where you want to be? Do you want to die and have your kids, you know, that shit don't work. People already feel bad. They already know the shit's fucked up. What we need is to say, I appreciate you keep showing up, that you're still here. You've not given up, that you acknowledge your harm. They're putting you miles ahead of many people. So we need that. So I would just say that I would offer that is have some reflection on who you are when you're harmed and then be able to like embrace that person. I know it's hard, but it's a practice. So we have to keep flexing that muscle.
I know we have to wrap up, and I'm not going to find the words in the brief amount of time that we have to fully convey the impact that the three of you had on me, and based on the chat, I'm going to say on others. And this idea that I can kind of come undone a little bit in the care of folks who can mirror back, you know, the fullness of who we are and not just the act we committed, right? I think this idea that no one is disposable and that compassion for ourselves, that are like being in our truth in the messiness of what that is. Y'all just tilted the Earth's axis a little bit today. My Earth's axis for sure. And we know how many ways you're pulled in life. Thank you. Thank you for making room for this conversation. We always ask our participants to give us feedback on the session. Carly or Hamida might drop that in. Also, Hamida, can you name what you just put in the chat? I think it's important.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So, wow, okay, I need a deep breath after the session. Knowing that I don't want to speak for other folks, but this time and thought and reflection might have brought some things up for some folks. So we shared the website for Camille Jones, a therapist who's joined us in prior Centering Justice sessions. who you may reach out to if you want to connect with someone who could support with therapy. So also really want to uplift that resource. She also led a session called It's Okay to Not Be Okay, if you want to take a gander at that too. And then also want to uplift that I shared a link to the survey. We tried some new things today. We're going to keep trying new things based on what you share. So play with us, co-create with us. Let us know how this felt and what you'd like for the future.